When I started this project, it was, if I remember well, in 2018. And the starting point of the project was this residency. I made in Centre d'Arte Natura de Ferrera. It's like a residency space, an art space, located in a really small town in the Catalan Pyrenees mountain. Or instead of approaching the idea of nature, that thing that was the main idea of the residency, I kind of found another approach, and I found my own way of engage with the experience and my own way of engaging. It was like to research different persons in history, in art history, in the history of literature. Basically, people who had isolated themselves, looking for like kind of a specific environment to put themselves in a mindset where they kind of creative production could kind of reach another approach, another level. Some of them are like examples like George Orwell and Malcolm Lowry, people who produced what after have been understood as masterworks of literature in this context. So the idea, it was like, kind of looking for examples, looking for references in other people who had like similar experiences, even though mine, it wasn't that. I mean, it was with other people. I was with another artist, and the people, it's not like I was in the middle of the forest or something. But coming from Barcelona, the experience like was kind of, I've had this like, oh fuck, I'm here. I'm fucking alone here in this
You have
place.
some pictures maybe
that
we can show
I can show the place. It's a lovely place.
Exactly.
Wait a second.
We go back. Okay, now I think people should see that's the place where you were.
This picture is basically this building with a big R in the structure, the big A. This is the building of the residency, and this is the town. It's kind of 20 people living in this town during all year, and the other houses are kind of just second residencies. So people who just go down in the summer or during the weekends. So it was kind of an empty. So it feels smaller because there's not much people in it, and I spend it almost all the time like alone. And this is one of the studios of the space.
And you, so the idea of, if you go, I think, to the next, work that these are the 4 cabins that you kind of build, and you chose 4 particular and very strong characters. Also negative because, of course, Una Bomber, we know that.
He was a terrorist.
Yeah. So what was the thing? Because I guess there are also other authors that actually went in the nature, the forest, to create, to isolate themselves in order to create work.
I mean, the beginning of this specific work called like cabins collection, the four cabins are presented as a single work, as a single installation. It was furor, the first thing I thought about it. It's like this guy who's considered one kind of a proto-anarchist. So kind of this some of his texts are considered kind of the beginning of some kind of radical right thinking.
Sorry, you're talking about Thoreau here.
Thoreau.
Thoreau.
I mean, the pronunciation is horrible.
We were trying last time. How do you pronounce it?
I'm sorry, people from England or whatever.
Thoreau, I guess.
Whatever.
I think it's
anyway.
So he was author of Civil Disobedience, which inspired Gandhi and Luther King even.
And I was interested in this. He isolated himself in this cabin that he basically built himself in the forest for 2 years. This is what the legend says. This is what the book says. And then he write this book about the experience. And there is kind of this philosophical approach, and also some kind of renegating to the life and cities. And he was also the author of a text called, yeah, as you said, Civil Disobedience, because he was kind of struggling against the state in a moment where in the United States slavery was still legal. So he basically rejected to pay taxes to a government who was like allowing slavery to happen, and then he went to jail for for a short time. The idea of when the state is doing something that's not right, it's not moral, so I kind of have to disobey. Even in his case, it's kind of a non-violence way of protesting. I think it's something that it's been very relevant, and it's still being very relevant now. The concept of civil disobedience. I mean, I come from Catalonia, and now it's something that's being important concept for the last years, and I think it's very important in every protest in everywhere.
Obviously this idea of being in touch with nature, that was looking also for it. It was a transcendentalist, and it's the idea of also, living with small things in a Spartan way, in a way. You don't need to have so much in order to really just live or enjoy life. And for him, was really important this, contact with nature. But of course, Virginia Woolf was like, the get inspired in this cabin next to her house. And Le Corbusier, this cabin was a holiday house, and then he spent, I think, the last years of his life there, if I'm not wrong. So yeah, it's really interesting. Then you've got other two models, I think, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is when the project was exhibited in La Panera in Lleida. At the same time that I produced the cabin collection, the fourth works, I also produced this one that is the same process, exactly the same process, but in this case I went more deep in the history of the person I was quoting and the person I was researching. In this case, it's Malcolm Lowry's cabin. It's also a similar story. I mean, he was living for many years in this cabin with his wife in some kind of lost place in the Canadian shore. And he was also working in his book. He was a writer. He was working in this in what afterwards it has been considered like a masterpiece of British literature. It's like Under the Volcano. As I found, like researching about the guy and about the experience and about the books, it happened that his cabin it was set on fire at a certain point. So there was like this book, unpublished book he was working on. It was like in Ballast to the White Sea, and it was absolutely destroyed in the fire. So he lost it, something that he could never like kind of recover from it. When the project was exhibited in France, in Valence, in Act 3, this was the title of the exhibition, A Magnificent Place to Live, Work, or Commit Suicide. And there is this thing about some kind of self-destructive attitude in the willing of isolate yourself. At a certain point in some of the examples, Malcolm Lowry is a clear example of it. Mm-hmm. This sentence is also extracted from a letter that he wrote to his editor, Gerald Knoxon. When I decided to choose this sentence as a title, this is what I was trying to depict or to relate, this kind of self-destructive attitude as a creative, as a way of, I don't know, engage with a certain kind of production in art, in this case in literature, and also related to this idea of isolating oneself. One of the examples I was looking at it in the project, when I was working with the example of George Orwell, because George Orwell, it's this big house in the middle of the exhibition room that we can see here in the picture from La Panera. the thing about, the biographic thing about Giorgio was like when he was working in 1984, he was sick of tuberculosis, but he wanted to just finish the book, so he went to this space in a small island in Scotland called Jura, and there is nothing in this island, basically nothing. So it was kind of a dangerous thing to be isolated in an island where you're like far away from a hospital, and it's very humid and weather is very extreme. And it was specifically very bad for tuberculosis. He was so obsessed with the idea of Barnhill. Barnhill is the name of the house. Barnhill is house of Jura, and he had the idea that it was impossible for him to finish that book on time if it wasn't in Jura. So he kind of he was kind of destroying himself by doing that. One other work I produced for this exhibition also was like this poster. The Last Man in Europe, it was supposed to be the first idea for a title that Orwell's had for this book. And I found it also very interesting because it depicts also this feeling of loneliness, no? The Last Man in Europe, like that.
And it's interesting because there is also another author, film director, who was spent his last days in the nature in a cottage, and this person is Derek Jarman. And what's interesting that he was tested, he was diagnosed as HIV positive, and the idea of being, in this kind of outside the urban life with his garden. And this is actually work that you produce on that. And there's also actually a diary that you wrote, Modern Nature. I don't know if you guys read it. I started. It's pretty long, and it's a diary about, the garden that he cultivated, but it's also about, a diary of himself, dealing with this illness. And the interesting thing that, the idea of gardening now, the idea of taking care of plants, in a way, he was really in symbiosis with it. It was kind of a wild garden, was it? It wasn't kind of the, clean Swiss garden we see outside here. So it's the idea of relationship also, with nature itself. And how do you see like this idea of, again, garden, nature to heal yourself, but at the same time to, it's like helping each other, take care of plants, and they kind of take care, in a way, take care of me, or just like I feel better by just taking care of something, in this case, nature. What do you think about this relationship, especially in relation to Jarman?
Yeah, in this case, this is a very special work, and when I made it, it was not when I was like working in the other parts of the project. It was like 1 year after. So it's also kind of isolated in relation to the other works of the project. And also the approach is very different. And the experience of the author is very different. And I don't see any of the self-destruction approach that I could see in Laure's attitude, for example. But there is another kind of destruction going on. And in this case, as you kind of said, it had more to do with self-care than in self-destruction, somehow. And also it's maybe him, Jarman, and his relation to this specific cottage. He's maybe like Thoreau. They are the both of them, the two who were really thinking about nature by doing so. Maybe Laurie or Orwell, he didn't really necessarily thought about nature just for being there. It had more to be with their needs with their creative processes, not with nature. Nature was there kind of for help them. But maybe Jarman, as Thoreau, he was thinking about nature. He was spending time in his garden.
And it's it's interesting because there is also another author, film director, who was spent his last days in the nature in a cottage, and this person is Derek Jarman. And what's interesting that he was tested, he was diagnosed as HIV positive, and the idea of being, in this kind of outside the urban life with his garden. And this is actually work that you produce on that. And there's also actually a diary that he wrote, Modern Nature. I don't know if you guys read it. I started. It's pretty long, and it's a diary about, the garden that he cultivated, but it's also about, a diary of himself, dealing with this illness. And the interesting thing that, the idea of gardening now, the idea of taking care of plants, in a way he was really in symbiosis with it. He left, it was kind of a wild garden, was it? It wasn't kind of the, clean Swiss garden we see outside here. So it's the idea of relationship also, with nature itself. And how do you see like this idea of, again, garden, nature, to heal yourself, but at the same time to, it's like helping each other, take care of plants, and they kind of take care, in a way, take care of me, or just like I feel better by just taking care of something, in this case, nature. What do you think about this relationship, especially in relation to Jama?
Yeah, in this case, this is very special work, and when I made it, it was not when I was like working in the other parts of the project. It was like 1 year after, so it's also kind of isolated in relation to the other works of the project, and also the approach is very different, and the experience of the author is very different, and I don't see any of the self-destruction approach that I could see in Lore's attitude, for example. But there is another kind of destruction going on. And in this case, as you kind of said, it had more to do with self-care than in self-destruction, somehow. And also it's maybe him, Jarman, and his relation to this specific cottage. He's maybe like Thoreau. They are the both of them, the two who were really thinking about nature by doing so. Maybe Laurie and Laurie or Orwell. He didn't really necessarily thought about nature just for being there. It had more to be with their needs with their creative processes, not with nature. Nature was there kind of for help them. But maybe Jarman, as Thoreau, he was thinking about nature. He was spending time in his garden. This idea about nature that's very complicated and it's kind of obsolete. The modern idea of nature is kind of obsolete, and now it's difficult to think where's the limit between what's nature and what's not. Thinking about my family or my experiences, and my dad's like almonds farm, or me working there. For example, I spent all these like several months during the lockdown working in this almond farm, like kind of sharing time with the streets in Catalonia, in Lleida. And also having a not very romantic relation with nature, and some kind of an almond tree farm. It's a business, so you kind of force the trees to produce in a in a very even aggressive way. We shape them in a very specific way so they produce as much armor as possible for us, so we get good money from it and we can make a living from it. It's not a romantic idea of nature at all, but at a certain point it's beautiful when you are there. I mean, it's kind of magical. Have different experience when you are there, obviously, than when you are like in the forest, but you also have a different experience when you are there and you are in the city. You know? There is an aggressive way humans deal with plants. We're gonna talk about nature anymore, about plants in itself. And in German, there was this kind of approach. Of course, there is like the human hand, and there is like a shaping of the landscape by the human hand. And this can be also somehow aggressive. But his approach, it was like maybe the less aggressive possible. German's approach, not this idea of integrating his garden in a landscape that it was already very aggressive because it was just by a nuclear power plant.
So exactly, there was next to a nuclear plant.
It was, and so it was also some kind of self-awareness from somewhere who's really sick and that knows that he's gonna die, and lots of his friends are dying, and taking care of this garden every day, but doing it in this house that is just by a nuclear power plant. I mean, it's like a poetic act in itself. And then he made a film there, the garden. Well, as experimental as lots of the other films that he did. But yeah, it's a different approach than the other reference for this project, and one of the most interesting. Yeah.
Please go to see Primal Distance online, and thank you, John, for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And
thank you for having me.